There's been a lot of debate in the House of Commons and media about the price on pollution. I'm sure you've heard it. We just had a gimmicky confidence motion on it actually, in which the Conservatives relentlessly rhymed, axe the tax and spike the hike. Here's the thing. If you care about saving the planet, then polluters should pay. As Conservatives like to say, it's only common sense. Otherwise, polluting is costless for individuals, while we all bear significant collective costs. The cost of wildfires and other disasters, the cost of smog, the costs to our kids of a less livable world. Pollution pricing isn't the only climate action we're taking, but it is the most cost-effective. Smart policies, of course, don't always make for easy politics, but leaders embrace these challenges. They defend smart policy and they educate people to bring them along. In contrast, current Conservatives and their new Reform Party, they rhyme cheap slogans and dumb down our discourse in an effort to dismantle that smart policy. According to William Nordhaus, one of the 2018 Nobel Prize winners in economics, Canada is showing the world how carbon pricing can best work. And that's where we should start. Pricing pollution works. Price signals work. Even better, they work cost effectively by harnessing the power of the market. As the price of polluting increases, the market seeks out cleaner alternatives, and businesses innovate to meet that demand. Carbon pricing has been in place in BC since 2008. It's used in dozens of jurisdictions around the world, and it's a significant part of our climate action plan. If Conservative inaction had continued post-2015, we'd be looking at around 800 megatons of emissions in 2030 under a no climate policy scenario. Instead, with a suite of serious policies in place under this Liberal government, we've bent the curve by 30%, with other policies that are announced or in progress set to bend the curve by another 10% to 467 megatons. On Environment Canada's assessment, carbon pricing overall, both industrial and consumer, accounts for about a quarter of the overall drop from business as usual in 2015. Meanwhile, the Canadian Climate Institute's independent assessment tells us that the consumer price alone is the fourth most impactful policy, responsible for 10% of the projected emission reductions from policies currently in place. Industrial carbon pricing is the most impactful. The second thing to know, carbon rebates are fair. The purpose of the price is to change behavior, not to generate revenue. At least 90% of the revenue is rebated directly to individuals who file their taxes, and there's a top-up for rural Canadians. The rebate makes 8 out of 10 households better off on a cash transfer basis. I'll say that again. The rebate makes 8 out of 10 households better off on a cash transfer basis. That's taxes paid and rebate received. That's determined by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Only the 20% pays more than they receive back. Why? Because they pollute more. According to StatsCan modeling, 94% of households earning $50,000 or less will receive more in the rebate than they pay in the price. Yes, there's a legitimate debate to be had about the economic costs of different climate action. I'm fine with having that debate. What I'm not fine with is the repeated lie that the price on pollution is responsible for people lining up at food banks. It is deeply cynical and wrong to trade on the real stress and real struggle of so many to kill the most cost-effective way of reducing pollution. And yet, Poilievre consistently tells us that food bank usage is at a record high and that axing the tax will bring home affordable food. You've almost got to admire the liar because it is an incredible lie. Yes, food bank usage is at a record high. Mostly Conservative premiers, by the way, responsible for administering welfare and disability income supports, they should be ashamed of the pitiful benefit levels for those in need. And no, food bank usage is not at a record high because of the price on pollution. The affordability crisis is driven by 20% plus inflation in food and shelter costs over the last couple of years, the latter driven partly by high interest rates. As economists Toom and Winter put it, gradually increasing indirect taxes, including carbon taxes, have caused overall consumer prices to be only 0.6% higher in October 2023 versus January 2015. These are effects to be sure, but they are orders of magnitude smaller than the actual increases in prices we've seen in Canada. Carbon pricing is definitively not to blame for affordability challenges. Their words, not mine. Now, Pierre Poilievre is not going to help poor people. If he cared about poor people, he wouldn't weaponize their real hurt to attack unrelated climate policies. Instead, he would champion expanding the Canada Workers' Benefit, delivering a substantive Canada Disability Benefit, or some other poverty reduction measure. And it's worth noting that low-income households, the bottom quintile, they remain significantly better off after the rebate, even taking into account the PBO's additional economic analysis. So no, the carbon price is not sending people to food banks. And that's assuming, by the way, that the PBO's analysis is complete, which it isn't. So let's get to that report, because every party is quoting the PBO and it's causing a frustrating amount of confusion. So to recap, the PBO tells us that most households are better off on a fiscal basis. In other words, most households receive more from the rebate than they pay in the price. The PBO goes on to say, though, that when economic costs are also accounted for, most households will be worse off due to the carbon price's modest hit to GDP. But that analysis is of little value without a fuller accounting for the economic costs of climate change or alternative climate action. I met with the PBO recently to address that concern, and the PBO had an interesting take. Mr. Giroux likened climate action to sending weapons to support Ukraine, and that it might be easy to quantify the upfront costs and hard to quantify the long-term benefits, but it's still the right thing to do. And while their mandate was to assess the cost of the specific proposal before them, they acknowledged that pricing pollution is the most cost-effective measure to reduce emissions. Or, as a recent letter signed by over 150 Canadian economists put it, Canada could abandon carbon pricing and still hit our climate targets by using other types of regs and subsidies, but it would be much more costly to do so. Incredibly, Poilievre calls the price on pollution a scam in the same breath that he offers the snake oil of technology, not taxes. Again, if there isn't a price on pollution, alternative measures will be more expensive. We certainly aren't going to see equivalent climate action from the private sector if businesses don't have incentives to innovate. So if you want technology, not taxes, it's going to be left to more costly regulations or government subsidies. And where do government subsidies come from? They come from taxes, without the rebate. Now, Paul Romer, the other 2018 Nobel Prize-winning economist, he's rightly said that the problem isn't not knowing what to do. The problem is getting consensus to act. And that's what all of this is really about. It's a relentless conservative campaign to undercut serious climate action and destroy any consensus to act. With the Liberals in government, we have finally seen serious climate action. Again, on the Canadian Climate Institute's independent analysis, policies currently in place will prevent 226 million tons of emissions by 2030. Policies under development prevent another 43. Additional announced policies should account for another 39. We can't let up on serious implementation, because even with all of that in place, all of that under development and in progress, all of that comes to fruition, we're still stand to fall about 30 megatons short of a target that should already be stronger. So yes, there is more we can and should do. And for example, considering the record profits of oil and gas companies in recent years, we could mandate that excess profits be invested back in efforts to reduce emissions, clean up environmental damage, and support sustainable jobs. UK Conservatives shouldn't be more progressive on this front than we are. And let's be honest, the government hasn't been without missteps, including and especially the $35 billion pipeline expansion sinkhole. But this is equally indisputable. In 8 years, this Liberal government has put policies in place to bend the emissions curve by 30% from where it would have been otherwise, with further policies on the way to bend it by another 10%. So yeah, call it imperfect, but that is incredible progress all the same. And so much of it will be undone if Poilievre and his new Reform Party have their way. Not only the market-based price on pollution, but the oil and gas emissions cap, the clean electricity regulations, and more. We can't afford to spike this progress or axe serious climate action. Inaction is just too costly, both to our finances and to our future. And that is what is really at stake.